Hollylynne. I'm a distinguished university professor of mathematics and statistics education at NC State University, where I have been active in the field of statistics and data science education since 2000. So I'm in my 26th year here.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for writing this fantastic essay with your colleagues about data investigation cycles. I think it's such an important part of the learning progressions themselves and just data science and data literacy in general. I was really interested to ask you, so in your essay, you write that students should develop a practice of using data in investigations of real world phenomenon. And I'm really interested in why you think that investigating with data rather than just learning about data is so important for K through 12 students.
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that like learning about data is learning what data is. And so when you're doing a data investigation, you are investigating the data, but you're investigating what the data is about, right? So data have context, and it's one of the beautiful things that separates data science from mathematics. We don't have data without a context, without something being measured to come to life, to be encoded as data. And so when students are investigating a real world phenomena, they're trying to make sense of that phenomena. They're trying to learn about that through the data. And so the data is really a vehicle to help them make sense of their world.
That makes sense. So it's really, you need that context to understand the data at
Right,
all. Like
right.
without context, just
That's
sort
right.
of.
Data science, I mean, yes, there are theoretical aspects of data science, but data science in practice is about something else. you know.
And speaking of context, I think a big part of the learning progressions that people may not know is that the context in which the strands are built is hopefully in tandem with a data cycle. And
Mhm.
so in your essay, you mentioned that these learning progressions should help students build investigative skills that build over time, but also they're building in a cycle, basically. So I'm just curious, how do you think the learning progressions support teachers and
Mhm.
students in developing these investigative habits?
I think what the learning progressions can help educators and curriculum writers do is to create those learning moments, those opportunities to have a sense of, young kids when they're learning to investigate their world with data are capable of doing X, Y, and Z. Like this is what they're capable of thinking about regarding measurement. I'll stick with measurement, which tends to fall in the learning progressions under creation and curation, under that strand. And, so when students are just beginning to think about measuring some attribute about something that they're interested in the world, they have some good ideas about the kinds of characteristics that they would want to know about. Right. So for people in their class, they might want to know about their hair color. All right. That's an attribute we want to measure, and we want to kind of name it in certain ways. It might be whether it is straight or curly, or if it has any kind of hair dye in it. Students come up with really natural ways of kind of thinking about how they want to measure something. And then as they get older, they really start thinking about, and they're capable of saying, okay, now I know that I want to measure, someone's hair color, but what if they actually have a shade of brown that is pretty light? Is it blonde or is it brown? And they start recognizing that that measurement itself is subjective, and that what category you put things into is a human decision. And the learning progressions really bring that out in saying that that we have to make sure that our students understand that when they're working with data, data is developed by humans. There are some human decisions around how those come to be. And then there's human decisions about what we what we want to investigate about that data, right? And so what a progression idea does for teachers is to help them recognize the kinds of things that can happen early on and how you can build on that as kids get more experience.
I'm very interested in, because something that I've heard over and over about these data cycles is that it's not a closed loop. It's not a closed cycle.
Right.
It's iterative. It
Yeah.
has, like, even though there's a progression of steps,
Right.
you can constantly go back and forth. I'm wondering if you could get into that a little bit.
Doing data science is this really back and forth, and thinking about questioning is a really good way of thinking about of being able to illustrate the iterative cyclic nature of it. So you're curious about some phenomena in the world. All right, let's say roller coasters. Right, you're very curious about roller coasters, and you start having wonderings about the new kinds of roller coasters that are created, but yet you see some of these parks that have older roller coasters as well. So you might not have a well formulated question, but you just want to learn something about roller coasters. When you then get some data, if you go to some websites and you are able to get some data, you start learning about characteristics of roller coasters, how tall they are, how fast they go, what material they made of, and that experience itself, knowing what you can measure about a roller coaster, can spark new questions. All right. So now you had a general idea, you went and you got some data, but now maybe you're ready to actually ask a more targeted question. All right. And so then in that, you might have to think about, well, actually, I only want to look at roller coasters that were created after, say, 1980. All right. So you might pick a year that you want to, like, a relative recent, although our young kids today would say 1980 was very old. But maybe you want relatively recent roller coasters. And so you decide to filter the data to only look at certain years. Right. So now you've processed your data because you've refined your question. Right. And going back and forth through this, you might realize that there are a couple different attributes about roller coasters that you would really like to know. Like, for example, do you sit down? Do you stand up? And do you lay flat? How are you actually positioned in the roller coaster? So you might go back to a database to actually find that information out. And so there's this iterative process. And then when you get into thinking about your analysis, there might be different tools, statistical tools, that you might want to use to help you in making sense of the data that you have to tell a story. And oftentimes you start with the wondering, you're refining that, and you have an eye on who might care about these roller coasters, and who I want to tell this story to. And so that might help me decide what kind of visualizations that I want to use, what kind of statistics that I might need to make sense of the data, and how I might craft that story, and what it might propose as it might make me more curious about something. Because if I only looked at 1980 and forward, I might come up with I might be wondering then, what about those older roller coasters? Are they different? And what would I need to find out about those coasters to see if they were different?
For educators who are reading the essay, who are watching this, and they want some practical ways they can begin bringing in these kind of conversations about the data investigation process, what would you suggest, like, even if they're new to teaching data science?
Yeah, so I think kids always like to think about characteristics, about, like, things about the people around them, right? And so gathering some data about themselves, about people in your school, about their families, that they can start telling stories. So I often do in my statistics class at NC State. On the very first day, I ask a couple different questions, as well as having my students think about a place in the U.S. or anywhere of like what do they consider to be their hometown. So asking questions that bring in different kinds of attributes in data about somebody. So things that are categorical, things that are numerical, things that are geographical, so that they start getting a sense of early on that a single case, like a person, has different attributes that you can measure about them. It could be their kind of their favorite food. It could be on a Likert scale, asking them to rate how happy they are today, and getting them to experience that we can measure multiple things about a single case and building up that structure of a data set, right? And then once you have a pretty simple, organically kind of formulated data set of the students in your class, then they start asking questions. Just ask them, tell me a story. Look at the data and tell me a story about the class. And the teachers will be surprised at the way that they will start digging into several of the characteristics of people in their class and wanting to tell a story about that. And that's a really easy entry way to get kids started in thinking about investigations. And then let them pose their own questions. What are they interested in?
Yeah.
You know? And then help them go find data, or you go find some data to help them investigate.
Is there anything else about data investigation processes that we didn't touch on that you would want to make sure our audience knows?
It may seem big, right? It may seem like really encompassing and that you don't have time in your class to do it, but there are so many objectives, standards that you might hit during an investigation that students have those opportunities to learn when you actually let them loose with data. And so think of it as an opportunity for some organic kind of ways to bring in lots of learning opportunities rather than, oh, this looks too big and I don't have time to do it.